Because, okay, so, you know, as we were talking about shorts, so the reality is I'm a George Marshall groupie. I don't know if others of you know who he is. He's a UK climate activist, and so while I feel like my colleagues all are like James Hansen, Bill McKibben, I'm like, no, it's all about George Marshall because he's got this cute UK accent, and so one of the things I adore about him is he spent about 1.5 years in Wales talking about climate change with regular people, trying to figure out how it fit into the narrative of their lives, and mostly just listening for 1.5 years, even though he's a renowned expert on these topics. And so just like, okay, anyone who can shut up and listen that long is in a kind of cool place. So he just wrote a new book about why we're not talking about climate change. And essentially, Marshall's kind of fundamental argument, and maybe the first half of the book, is that if you accept climate change is real, creates a lot of anxiety about your life and the life of your loved ones, and it sort of implies you have to do some really deep things to not be part of the problem. At the same time, there's no urgency. So you don't have to do that today. You could next week, like, really take that on. And so what happens in that is we all keep it in the background. He tells a story about being at a dinner party with a bunch of very like-minded people, and someone talks about their trip to New Zealand, and he says something about climate change, and everyone gets quiet, and it's like awkward for a few minutes, and then someone says, that was an amazing fruit tart, and everyone talks about the fruit tart for 10 minutes. Because we don't know how to talk about this. And so we tend to think it's going to happen to other people, it's not really clear, and we're not even here really talking about the deniers. It's sort of all of the folks in the middle, and even those of us who think these are issues, who just would prefer not to talk about this. And of course, all the reasons behind that, you know, that this is complicated, it's slow, intergenerational. One of the things he points out at some length is there are all these things that we've always believed are good for us, including carbon dioxide and photosynthesis, and that now suddenly we're hearing are not good for us. Progress isn't good for us in the way it seemed to be good for us before. That's the cognitive dissonance in that is tricky. There's also no external enemy. I mean, we're really good at things where we can identify people in another place who are the bad guys that we can drop things on. We lack that narrative here. He also talks about it being multivalent. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Meaning that there's all these multiple interpretations, and because all of us have confirmation bias, which means if you tell me something, the piece of it that resonates with what I already think is the piece I'm going to latch onto. So when you tell a really complicated thing to people, they all pick out the pieces that fit with their narrative. And so they're all looking at different pieces of this. And all of this together tends to make behavioral economists and sociologists and psychologists all talk about how climate change is this impossible problem. That I quote in stuff I do a lot a Dan Ariely line about how climate change is the perfect example of how you would not want to design a behavioral intervention because it's all the wrong signals. Part of what George says is we need to stop saying that. Because when we say this is the perfect storm, this is the impossible problem, it also gives us permission to not talk about it, to set it aside. It's really convenient to frame it that way, but it's also an excuse. And so he's, I thought for George, really pretty optimistic here. He once told me in a discussion we had at an event that he loves the way Americans think that they can make the world better, kind of thing. It's just so adorable. And so it's good that he's thinking that, too, at this moment. And what he's saying is that, you know, ultimately, as a species, we have huge capacity to do things collectively. When we have shared convictions, that are reinforced through social norms, that speak to our sacred values. So part of what he does in this book is say, you know, there's this emphasis on how we talk about this with information, but really information isn't enough. We've got to touch people in both rational and emotional ways, and talks a lot about what's that narrative that touches the sacred values. So he talks about Dan Kahneman's work on, you know, thinking fast and slow and all of that kind of stuff about how mostly we don't like to analyze data. There's an exception in this room. There's a cohort here who that's not true about, but out there, most of us, me, don't, you know, would prefer the intuitive piece. And so how to do that, George takes a really interesting turn. He says that green teams need to learn from the God Squad. He says if what we need to do is create a narrative that's about sacred values, let's look at the institutions that have been doing this for thousands of years. What could we learn from those institutions? And he says, so one of the fundamental things you learn is that belief is held socially. That there's this fellowship of believers where they come together and talk about their beliefs, and they talk about their struggles with those beliefs, and that creates a community that makes it easier to be a believer. There's also, in almost all religions, these moments of commitment where people stand up and say, yes, I believe in this, I'm part of this, and you get to sort of build that tribe. That there's a recruitment, if you will, phase there in religion that we haven't thought about in the climate change movement. In religion, personal epiphanies are part of the norm. That's part of the narrative, is the moment that you figured this out. And if you think about sustainability, think about some of the rock stars in sustainability in the U.S. Ray Anderson at Interface. You know, those are personal epiphany stories. People who go. I was telling Rex a story this morning about a turkey processor in Iowa who went to the local landfill, and everything he could see was the blue plastic wrap from his facility. And it prompted him to get on a path to zero waste, because it wasn't okay that everything in the landfill came from his facility, kind of thing. So there's that personal epiphany sort of piece of this. The other thing, and he doesn't have a solution for this, is that in nearly all religions, there's a forgiveness thing. There's a way that you talk about what you've done and you let it go. And in the climate change conversation, we don't have that yet. We sort of all go, okay, we're all doing all these really bad things, but there's no sort of path to forgiveness, which is maybe part of why we avoid the conversation, because it's not a very fun thing to just be always in the I did a bad thing kind of thing. So I think that's I encourage you to check this out. He's got a ton of videos online that are just really fun because he's funny and sharp and critical of all of us, including himself. But Marshall also really has an issue with us defining climate change as an environmental issue. He would argue that part of our challenge here is that we made this a story about the environment, not a story about social justice or human rights. Or one of the things he did at one point is he went through multiple human rights websites looking for the word climate change. So he goes through Amnesty International and like 4 or 5 sites. And on most of them, there's no mention of climate change, or it's mentioned once. And so then he was like, well, but maybe that's not fair. So he looks for ice cream. Ice cream is mentioned like 5 times on a website that has no mention of climate change, even though the issues that they're dealing with in terms of human rights and water access and things are completely tied to climate change. But for those organizations, climate change is an environmental issue, and you want to stay away from it because that's polarizing, even though it's driving their agendas. You know, actually, when I finished it, the next morning I brought it into Raj, and I was like, okay, you need to read this chapter about green teams learning from God squads, because I think there's a whole thing there about community and connectedness that is really relevant to what we do and how we try to get people to share their norms with each other and be part of a more visible community of people who do things a certain way. I think that's still evolving for us, but yeah, I mean, we've been watching his videos forever just because we think he's our rock star.
I'm Beth Churchill from American Family Insurance. I'm here to talk about our dream for a zero-waste future. Why do we have a dream for a zero-waste future? Because we did go to our landfill. We got in the truck and we followed our waste one day on a Monday morning, and we had two 30-yard dumpsters dumped at our transfer station, and we went, gosh, we're not doing so well. And this is specifically to our headquarters, which houses 3,500 people. All of those contaminations in an office waste stream, shame on us. We have recycling bins everywhere. What is this? The other reason we decided why Zero Waste Future was a dream for us is because our mission is to inspire, protect, and restore dreams of customers. And our 2008 sustainability plan had it as one of its objectives. So let's get on with it. So this started about a year ago in full time. And what I want to emphasize today is we work on this every hour of every day, 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, 12 months a year. We looked for a model to take this journey on. We found one we really like. So this GM model is the 9 steps we use on our way, and my little pizza overlay is our version of where we're actually acting on the steps we are. And you see there's a slice there that we can't really claim we've done a lot with yet. And on the right side of the screen, we sat down and rigorously identified what our streams are. And these are streams at our headquarters and across our operating states and all the wholly owned facilities we own. So mapping those streams and what to do with them as they leave the building. The other thing we did is we defined what zero waste meant to us, and we went perfectly to the Alliance, and we used this as our peer definition, which means zero waste for American Family Insurance is 90% of all the waste that leaves the building is diverted from the landfill. Now notice I said leaves the building. So this doesn't even touch our supply chain. It is not the Ray Anderson version of zero waste. It's when it comes to us and where does it go after. That's where we're at, the very beginning, or we're immersed in that. We then started building an organizational chart around this, and this just was mapped weeks ago. So, we went to the dumpster dive a year ago, and we're finally mapping this. On the left arm, you'll see organics is the first stream. We're heavily immersed in that stream. That's where we spend all of our time. But we also mentioned that we're going to have multiple streams and project leaders on each of those streams and project leaders on each of those streams in each of our facilities. So this organizational chart is just, it's horizontally going to grow exponentially once you look at all those streams I identified earlier. We then went on a 3-year plan that we just finished authoring weeks ago, because you'll notice, if you can see on the slide, 2015 is the first year of the 3-year plan. And the 3-year plan has 3 pillars or objectives, and that is building community relationships, minimizing our environmental impact, and proactively mitigating risks, all related to what goes out our buildings. And inside that, then we put in these objectives and orders to our objectives and how we are going to meet these and the resources we're going to assign to them. We have, many of you know Maggie Becker. Maggie is she spends 80% of her time full-time on zero waste, and the rest of her time monitoring all the energy use of our facilities. And then there's a steering committee of 6 of us, and I'm in charge of metrics for zero waste. We have someone in charge of communication for zero waste, and we have Maggie, who's the program lead of organics inside zero waste. So the organizational chart is robust, but just beginning. So I think this is the part that Kathy wanted me to emphasize today, is how we identified the many ways we interact with zero waste. So I'm just going to go through this little rippling of partnerships. Sodexo is our food vendor for the headquarters of American Family. Obviously, we couldn't do anything about organics recycling without our food vendor at the table. We meet every 2 weeks. The head of Sodexo's in the room with us every 2 weeks. Oops. Sustain Dane, our wonderful local not-for-profit, where we use their Sustainability Business Network, just like we use Baxter's, to meet quarterly to network and share and talk best practices. And we do. We engage in the conversation about how are you doing this? What are you doing with this? So Sustain Dane has been an incredible partner for us for a long time. And the City of Madison, we're one of the 6 commercial buildings in the City of Madison's pilot, which is growing to 26 since a month ago. And we've been in that pilot for 2 years now, so we have a constant conversation about, well, what bags are we going to use that are compostable? What's the specification of the compostable bag we get to use in our organics bin that the city will take into their biodigester in 2017, so, or 18 as the scale slides. So we work closely with them on what their needs are, so we are teed up that our organics goes into that future state of the city. So that's a key partner of ours for our organics part of our zero waste. Pelletary is our hauler. They make sure it goes not to the landfill, and we now divert it in its own compactor, so it's very easy for them. After we did our dumpster dive, we changed that up. GCA is our housekeeping and or greenhousekeeping and or day greenhousekeeping vendors, so they clean during the day, and we have a greenhousekeeping program. They are in the room every 2 weeks as well. They are actually they're amazing because that chain of that stream wouldn't go where it's supposed to go without them. They're the ones going and picking it in all the different places and making sure it goes to where it needs to go physically. Unisource is our facility supplier, so our paper towels, which is part of our organic stream, and our other paper products, so they're a key player. WasteCap Wisconsin, we're using their WasteCap Trace online software program as our benchmarking metrics. We're customizing the software. It's a pretty simple, accessible software to map all of those streams we identified, what they are. So let's say we diverted 10 pounds of batteries. We will enter that in. It'll translate to tons, 0.00 tons, and we'll use their software program for all of those streams. Currently, we use it just for our construction and demolition waste streams. We're going to add those other streams to that software. So we have a metrics platform. Lands' End was the last one on there. Lands' End, and Travis isn't here, he's a representative. So Lands' End, and we tour them, they tour us, we tour them, they tour us. We're constantly nudging each other with best practices. We went out to Trek a month ago, so we're sharing in businesses in the field to see how it's really done. What your signage look like, how are you doing it, what does your containers look like? So there's a lot of field time continuing with the best practices. And then Zero Waste, we just joined as a founding member of the Zero Waste Business Council, which is a national organization that is going to provide a certification and auditing on zero waste. And we plan on being the first insurance company in the United States to have a zero waste certification. That's our goal. I'm going to go a little further on this. This is a high level. They have sort of a LEED-like looking certification program, just not a lot of rigor behind their criteria. So we're going through the 120 options on that certification right now and vetting it, where we're at, where do we need to go, what we know, what we don't know, on every single one of these credits, and building a database on that. So then we can determine, are we going to shoot for silver? Are we going to need to do this many things just to get to bronze? That's where we're currently at with our third-party verification. And then these last series of slides, and I'll end with that, is how we're engaging around it. So we are engaging every moment of every day in a different way throughout, again, our national headquarters and as it relates to organics. So of that whole umbrella of zero waste, national headquarters organics is where we're living into right now. With multiple different signs, we're fortunate that we have a printing organization, so we're able to make these ourselves and custom design them. We have an entire series just on your coffee cup and all the different parts and the two containers they can go to with the current product our Sodexo vendor uses for coffee cups. So we nudge their specifications as well. So what does the compostable cup really look like? And that's nudging that conversation because they're in the room at the table every 2 weeks with us. This was a e-brochure we sent out to all the administrators or exec admins in the company so they could nudge their own business units and educate through an informed lens. And so we made a little e-brochure, electronic brochure for them. And this is sort of our rule of thumb. Film, foil, and foam is landfill. Everything else in our office building should be able to go elsewhere. And when in doubt, recycle. So if you don't know organics recycle, we say when in doubt, recycle. So that's one of our, and when in doubt, recycle. At least in the streams that our organization has. The signage is on a material called Yupo, which is sort of a kind of a vinyl combination. I don't know its chemical makeup, but it attaches to walls, peels and attaches. It attaches to containers and attaches to metal really well. So we're able to update it and change it out. We had all these images professionally photographed for this and then arranged them in the graphic. These are obviously at each container. These 3 signs are at the container location themselves. We have been in the cafeteria for every month, one Thursday a month. We take turns standing in the cafeteria, and no matter who's diverting their waste in our 3 containers, we help nudge their behavior. So one day I was on that post, myself and a colleague, and our CEO was there just kind of trying to figure it out through the signs. And we spent 20 minutes with him making sure he was on track. And so we nudged him. And then he's probably changed forever because of it. He's a follower, Kathy. So then the other part is AmFam is an internal social media component, and so we post a lot of our knowledge sharing. But this is where we physically took our floor plans and mapped out the replacement of all the containers. So there's, as you can see, a series of different kinds and different uses. And we physically drew it and then included it in the AutoCAD drawing and reprinted it. So we actually kind of, it shows up as part of the built environment. And as Rex knows, you don't often show the waste containers on floor plans, but we're mapping that so we have that map. So really quickly, I'm probably over here, but this paper towel talk is very important because our social media allowed the company to say, we are changing our 5-year vision, mission, and values. We want to hear from all of you. What would you like our vision, mission, and values as a company to be for the next 5 years? That got 2 or 3 posts. How the paper towel dispenser goes into the organics bin got about 350 posts. And they were kind of running at the same time. So the paper towel talks are a robust conversation that happens. How many paper towels, which stream, why did the dispenser shoot out more than one? We need different dispensers. And the vision, mission, and values of the company had to be decided by somebody else. Actually, those were being chatted at the same time. We host waste audits. We've had 3 or 4. We use Earth Week a lot, or we used Earth Week last year to do that. We dump our own waste and we sort it right there before we weigh it and after we weigh it. I think we've done 4 of those in the last year, inviting anyone to join. So they're actually touching themselves and understanding how it resonates with them. And then this gentleman on the left, he filmed the waste audit, and he was transformed. So he wrote a blog about it, and he's transformed, and he talks about it all the time now. And he was there behind the camera during the audit. And then obviously the PR, the external PR, helps our organization and our communities know that we are working hard at this. And that's our the top photo is the prep before, the pre-prep kitchen waste going into a bin to go into our compactor. The social media is constant. We do Trash Tuesdays, hashtag Trash Tuesdays. Every Tuesday we put out a post and chat it up, and we call it Trashy Tuesdays. We host a styrofoam recycling event in August, and all of our recyclables go to Unique and Wanakee to make picture frames. And we do trivia. What about this item? It's kind of not very clear here. This item, where would you think it should go? Mark the boxes, you're right or wrong, and here's why, and sort of advancing that educational component. So that was very quick. We've touched all of these organizations in some way. A lot of them are, we look at their best practices. We are now pushing back on Zero Waste Business Council on some of their criteria to make sure it's sound criteria for companies to pursue. And obviously, we're trying to pursue a level of certification in the next year, so we have that delineation in the sand. And again, at our headquarters with organics. That's our first goal. So that's the ripple effect of how we've been playing into that space so far. So office waste is a simple waste, right? Medical waste is something much different. You know, restaurant waste is something. Our office waste, as you saw in those 3 signs, what's left for the landfill is very small. Our stream right now, due to the amazing relationship of being in the city of Madison, our stream goes to the city, is screened, shredded screened, and what drops behind the screen, a level of compostables, doesn't go on, and the rest, this is the organics, it goes to an Oshkosh open landfill. That's the city's path right now. And so that screening, obviously some of that falls out. We've never seen that process yet. We'd like to see that. So we can design for more of it to stay in the stream. So again, of organics. The rest, like if we start talking about construction and demolition waste, which is a long family of waste, that's a much different model. So we fill the organics with the compostable, you can tell by those signs, and we fill the recyclables with all the 1 through 9s that the city takes, you know, in aluminum. And you can see right now, like you can see some of the compostables on our organic stream. And so this goes to, since it's Pelletary, they own their own transfer station now. They are sorting waste to resources themselves. They have an incredible online video of how it works. So they have human power diverting this into the resources. These are all market resources, and then those go off to that next step. So our incredible Pelletary, it's right next to the Humane Society. It's worth a tour. It's amazing, and there's a full conveyor belt manpower of all the city's waste that goes through there first, and that they haul, that they sort, and that's resources. I mean, they pull out, you know, some things don't go on, but so yes, we're assuming this pure stream is not landfill. We're counting how we divert leaving our building.
Okay,
Yep.
that's the distinction.
Yep. We count that we're expecting our Pelletary partner to divert as it's designed. Our City of Madison's landfill waste goes to Illinois. We drive it to Illinois. Our landfills are full here.
Thank you all for having me here. I like this little sort of not energy. I'm in the non-energy track here. I am at the right next door Public Service Commission. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm on their water team. We're, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 of us who work on water utility regulatory issues. We're kind of different in our state in that there's not another state in the country that regulates the financial elements of utility practices to the extent that we do. We monitor the state's 183 public utilities. So a couple years ago, the Commission decided that conservation and efficiency in the water realm was a very good thing, something we should be advocating for. The elements that came out of that initiative are we promote conservation and efficiency, that EPA Water Sense of Excellence Award. We've won that twice for our efforts on the promotional side of things. Conservation rates, of course, you all know rates are kind of like our bread and butter over there. We look at utilities who have, either from a regulatory driver perspective or for another reason, want to look at pricing as a way of nudging behavior. Review and approval of utility water conservation programs. If a utility is going to spend money on a conservation, a rebate or incentive program, for example, they need to come through us for approval. We have typically approved programs that are roughly from 1 to 2% of total revenues. Water loss control standards. This is a big initiative for us. This is more on sort of that supply side water conservation. On the efficiency side of things, it's a big initiative of ours. We've started tracking water utilities, water loss, and now our next, going into the future, we're going to try to help them take it from an audit where they're actually measuring their water loss to telling their decision makers they need to do something about it and pay for it. And then finally, since 2012, we had some administrative code changes that looked a little bit more closely at conservation and efficiency and kind of taking it, integrating it into all aspects of what we do at the PSC. And so now when a utility comes before us asking for a new well, new treatment facility, anything related to a new source of supply, we are asking them, have you looked at conservation and efficiency as a source of supply? So why in a Great Lakes state where we have, I don't know, there's debate about how many lakes we have, 15,000, something like that, lots of water. Why do we even care about conservation and efficiency? Well, I mean, just because we have an abundant source of supply, that does not give us, that's not sort of a license to run amok with our supply. How many of you are aware of Milwaukee's issues with infrastructure and heard about all their water main breaks this spring? There's a picture of that over there. That's a lot of energy, chemicals, treatment costs going literally down the drain. This picture on the right here, that's more on sort of the customer side of things. This was in Madison this winter in an area where they had not yet deployed their AMI system, so nobody kind of knew this was going on. I think it was somebody who had gone south for the winter, and it's essentially water, a leak that ran amok and was so profound that it started coming out the side of the house. That's a big water loss issue right there. But furthermore, in that we are in a Great Lakes state, I'm not sure that everybody thinks about where we get most of our water from, and that is from the ground, actually. And some of you may be familiar with the Central Sands area. There are conflicts related and growing competition for our water use, particularly in that area. This is Long Lake. This is an example of in the Central Sands area where the groundwater is very integral to supplying the surface water sources. So when you start overpumping the groundwater, you get a no-wake zone that's basically sand. This on the right-hand side, that was a clip from this summer where the county executive in Portage County finally said, what can we do? So we, along with the DNR, are going to go talk and see what they can do in terms of encouraging water conservation. There's not really a regulatory overlay that is going to require anybody to work together, but that's more that kind of community. We've talked a little bit this morning about community building. How can we all kind of come together to look at a solution here? Just real briefly, this groundwater withdrawal issue arises because, well, in the Central Sands area, it's actually easy to sink a well. Good news, bad news. Bad news, if you're in Stevens Point and you want a green lawn, you have to water it. It's sand. It's sitting on top of sand. There's some other pockets of scarcity, is what I like to call them. In the Waukesha area, of course, most of us are familiar with their request to divert Great Lakes water. They have a significant water quality issue, creating a water quantity issue. So what happens in our state, basically, and when I try to talk to folks up in the Abbotsford area, it's real hard to get water there. They talk about getting water in the desert when they do presentations. It's not that we're water scarce. It's that it's not always in the place and time that we need it and at the quantity we need it. So this is, something happened with my fonts here, too. I don't know. Anyway, I think this is, again, a little bit surprising for folks who don't work in the water industry in our states, that the bulk of our public water supply is coming from groundwater. And it's actually, that percentage has been ticking up over time. And this is just, again, talking about municipal supply. So municipalities that supply industries, commercial, and residential customers. Here's something that probably looks familiar to you all in the energy world. It's very a similar thing going on in water here. And that is declining sales per residential customer. There's been a trend since the 1992 Energy Policy Act. The low-flow toilets became a requirement in new construction around about 94. And it's the new normal. Just really basically, I call it like passive conservation. It's just from the new codes, new changes, we're seeing a reduction in the residential sales. Now, here's a little uptick, right? Still lower than where we were in 2007, which wasn't so very long ago. But that was the drought, if you can all recall, a very prolonged period of hot, dry weather. But whoa, I mean, our intern pulled these numbers together this summer. When I saw that one, like, okay, can you check? I had a poor guy. He had to go through 583 utilities data. Are you sure? Are you sure these are metered sales? But yeah, that number's faced a fair bit of scrutiny, and it's true. This is a new low point despite an increase overall in customers. So this is a nationwide snapshot of how we use water inside the house. So this is the bulk of it is happening in the bathroom. When you work in water conservation, you have to get cool with talking about toilets. It's something I've come to a realization I've come to over time. That leak inside the house part of it, that's another thing that hopefully with the deployment of AMI and more customer-friendly software interaction, people are going to be able to get a hold on this one. So I would expect over time that the percentage that's attributable to leaks is going to go down. So given that we use water inside, what is sort of our I like to look at water as sort of what do you need? It's a human need. It's a very fundamental, we need it to survive, versus discretionary use, kind of nice to have water versus need to have water. And Kathy, you might be familiar with this graph. This is not probably this July, August, September blip. It's probably not everybody flushing their toilet more in those months. I mean, that is, even though we live in a mesic climate, there are people with certain landscapes, certain needs outdoor to water. And sure enough, looking in 2012, during our drought, and this is Waukesha, they have a very robust education and outreach plan. I mean, of course, in going for Great Lakes water, they have to have something in place. They have an inclining block rate structure, but this is still what they have going on. Okay, so if you're looking at Waukesha, the low-hanging fruit is to look at still continues to be outdoor watering. And so I always say when a community comes in and looks at what they want to do on conservation, what is I'm very big into making sure conservation doesn't get a black eye. I want their program to work. And not every community looks the same. So that we're seeing this is just in the Milwaukee area. There's my friend from Menominee Falls. These peaks are pretty consistent in the more kind of suburban bedroom communities, but look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee now, if you remember back to the last chart, our statewide average is somewhere around here. So all these communities are using more than sort of our statewide average. Milwaukee's up above the average, but they're not really very peaky. So there, if you're looking at Milwaukee in terms of conservation and efficiency, again, abundant water supply. They're only working at like 30 to 50% of capacity. But it's not an excuse to squander water. Probably in the Milwaukee area, you need to look at swapping out fixtures. There's older housing stock. There's a lot of multifamily. It's hard to, I think, in the energy world, you have an issue with that too, getting at the multifamily, kind of providing incentives. Same thing happens in water. And so after our years of having this conservation initiative in place, here are the conservation rates for residential customers. We've been a little more, I don't know, generous with how we define a conservation rate here in the state, in that most of our water utilities have a declining block rate structure. That is, as you use more, you get a discount on your rates. So I say we get them towards uniform. That is a step in the conservation direction. I also like uniform rates because there are not the affordability and equity issues associated with large families getting pushed into a higher block. Those kind of go away with a uniform rate. I really kind of like that uniform rate for residential. My colleagues out west and the people who sit on National American Water Association folks, we have a little friendly debate on this, but we're throwing them into the environmental or the conservation-oriented rates. Rebate programs, we don't have very many utilities who have a rebate program in place. I kind of talked to, Milwaukee's a good example. The Waterworks wasn't interested in that. Again, they have a lot of excess capacity, but the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District sure is interested in that because they are under consent decree, combined sewer overflows. They have a real incentive to reduce flows, so they have funded that program down there. And those are those little red blips where other utilities are partially or wholly funding a rebate program. And so I have to end with little water things because you guys probably don't see these every day. I'm also going to put in a plug for, we just released our Wisconsin Water Fact Sheet. I have copies out back there. It's out on our website. This is just, again, municipal supply, but it kind of gives you a snapshot of all the data we have over there. Very shortly, DNR, I have a little friendly competition with my buddy over in the water use section about when their Wisconsin water withdrawal report's coming out. It's about to come out in the next couple days. If you like that slick map with all the high-capacity wells, I mean, we came out first, but honestly, their report's a lot cooler. They have better toys over there, mapping and such. But, you know, finance, rates, how exciting can you get? So are there any questions? Or I wasn't sure what you were looking for. I know that last time some folks wanted to see more on water. And yes, Ingo.
I'm so glad that I think Denise went before me, because it just occurred to me that I don't have anything about water use in my metric that in the app. And here's something that I need to look into. That's why I was asking you about those metrics, because I think it is really important to have that. Well, this is an update on this Energy Diary app that I presented to the group, I think, earlier in the year. And it's motivated by the fact that there is a gap between environmental attitudes or education or whatever that the group has used here in translating that into behavior. And the motivation for this app is how do we bridge that particular gap? Because I guess the behaviorist in me believes that it's not because we lack desire to do the right thing or to protect the environment or to believe that there is climate change. It's really 90% of our daily behavior. We don't think about it. It's like going to I was looking at, I think, the posters that was printed at the American Family that Beth presented. I remember when I first encountered something like that in one of the food services, I stood there for about 5 minutes trying to decide what goes where. And I guess, I was just thinking that here I have a PhD, and it took me a while to figure out what goes into which bin. Imagine what the average person is going to take. And also, what happens if I'm in a hurry? If I'm already late for my next appointment, would I just give up and just throw it away? Because I think the psychologists in me know that this is how people are going to respond to it, to an information overload. And the fundamental things that we have to believe is that people are, well, we're lazy, we're chronically, I think, pressed for time and various other things. So most of the things that we do, even though we believe that we wanted to do the right thing, we are constrained by environmental reasons and our situation to be able to carry that out. So I guess my objective is to think of a way to, again, it's about nudging people in the right direction and knowing that they need reminders. They need an easy ways for them to understand what their actions would translate into from an environmental standpoint. So the lack of consistent and specific feedback. And going back to Denise's answers about, if I were to build the customers every 6 months, there is no way for me to track how my behavior today is going to make a difference 6 months later, because we don't remember what we did yesterday, let alone 6 months ago. So, so those are the kind of things that this app was designed to overcome. And so that we could provide customizable activities with different frequencies, things that you do on a daily basis. For example, I think Beth is going to like this because we actually get people to say that, how many water bottles have you actually recycled today? Or how many cans of soda and all that? And if you actually consume this particular products for lunch or for breakfast or whatever, check them. I mean, the kind of daily things that you can do, or weekly things, how many times do you do your laundry? Maybe flushing toilets is a different story, but so that it would be with different frequencies and magnitudes, and so that we are trying to come up with hopefully a fairly exhaustive list of activities that we do on a daily basis in the behavioral sense. And we can actually customize that so that we would get a reminder using smartphone technology to remind, display, and aggregate your daily activities into a daily sort of like diary that you can keep in terms of how many did I actually remember to recycle today, and how many bottles did I dispose of, and what does that translate into. So that's the objective of this. And the idea is that, each person can just download the app and be able to check off activities that they do on a daily basis. And they get to choose, to have a daily reminder, okay, did you do this? And you can check it off, and it actually calculates your carbon savings for it, carbon unit savings for the activities that you do. And that's the metric that I was talking about. And the idea is that it does a running diary of just like, how many miles did you walk today, or how many steps did you take today. I think it's built off the same concept as an exercise or a diet app, so that you can actually track your daily information. And the idea is that we want to make it as easily user-friendly as possible, using all the wonderful features that smartphone apps have at our disposal. And the other thing that, again, that I wanted to experiment is different display and feedback format, because, again, in order to get people to do the right thing, carbon units or energy savings is not a very attractive feature. We don't understand what that means. So, again, going back to the ideas of landfill or, the trees or whatever. So what we have done is actually developing a metric to translate each one of these individual behavior in aggregate carbon units, and then translate it into the amount of carbon dioxide that the Wisconsin state tree sequestered in terms of carbon units, so that as you do more of these activities, it's like a savings account that you accumulate, and it translates into either a positive or a negative image. Because one of the things that I wanted to test is which one is more motivating. If it is a positive image, it's that as you do more of these things, the forest is going to grow bigger. And at the end of the month, you can see what you have accomplished. Or alternatively, the landfill is going to get bigger if you don't recycle today. So that it would be a concrete sort of like tangible feedback that you get based on your actions. And you can do a running balance of it on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. And the other image that we were thinking about is icebergs melting, for example, in terms of global warming. So there are different ways that we can test to see which particular image is actually more motivating on the users in terms of their behavior. And the beauty of it is, I guess, the dependent measures would be continued use. How long, after they have downloaded the app, how long do they continue to do it? Because we have a way of tracking. How often do they check in? How long do they continue to check? And, also basically using the tracking abilities of the smartphone apps to see whether it actually translates into some concrete behavioral changes. So we have all these wonderful features that allows us to do that. Again, this is what I'm learning working with engineers, I think, on campus, that because we have this ability, we are going to monitor how people behave. I say, well, we get into privacy issues that I don't think I want to go there. And honestly, I don't even need to have everything to be precise. For example, I don't need the exact amount of carbon units that actually can be saved from all these different behaviors. What I need is just an approximation to be able to show that there is a tangible change in the image of the forest, or in the size of the iceberg, or the size of the landfill. And that is good enough for me, so that it would be in some kind of a linear or geometric sense in terms as a reflection of that behavior. And so I guess, from a social scientist standpoint, we don't need precise measurements of everything. We just need to have something that perceptibly, from the user standpoint, that it makes a difference. Because those are the kind of things that has been shown to motivate behavioral changes. So right now, I guess the unfortunate thing is that the person who was working on designing the app has graduated and went to work for Epic, right? So we couldn't get him to do any more programming work, and we've just recruited a new, students to go into the programming side, and that's what has been held up right now, because I actually have IRB approval to get ready to field test this app. I just need the app to be completed so that I can do it. So hopefully, we can launch the initial field test, I think, this fall. I have everything ready to go. And I'm still soliciting feedback, especially the metrics that you are using in various organizations in water use and in also in landfill and recycling, because those are the kind of things that goes into the app, and I'm actually really would appreciate any kind of input from you, and I would be happy to share with you the metrics that we currently come up with, and I would love to have input in terms of what other activities should we add to enrich this particular app in order to increase their usability. So some of the factors under investigation, of course, is display formats, interactivity, and of course, ultimately, I like to elevate it to the role of social media and to add all these so that you can actually post your carbon savings for the day on your Facebook updates, you know, in terms of what you are doing, and also to design gaming features like what I think Kathy has done for Cool Choices, and to get people to actually compete for the kind of, you know, recycling activities or various other things that, you know, people actually do in their daily score, so that we would actually allow people to, let's say, you know, we become a team, and then we can aggregate our carbon savings into a team score, so that, and then again, you know, we build a bigger forest, for example. So those are the kind of things that I'm interested in pursuing and testing for it further down the line. And I have not had the opportunity to reach out to other organizations, and it sounds like, I think for a start, I guess, you know, the organizations that Beth and Denise represent would be, you know, a lovely way to actually build some context and to think about other alternate data sources, such as, you know, what the water utilities have and various other areas. So I look forward to any suggestions and future collaboration opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, so you all know Cool Choices. You've heard the strategy of it. It's gamification in a community setting, oftentimes a workplace setting. And one of the really neat things about it is that as part of the game, as part of the program, they collect data. They collect data on what people say that they are doing differently, and whether that was a new action or something that they'd already been doing, and they get points and credits either way. So Cool Choices has a rich data set that tells them self-reports on what people said their changed behaviors were. The question is, what does that actually mean in terms of the impact on sustainability? And we have been working with Cool Choices to track the energy side of things. So when they play games, oftentimes they will ask the people that play the games to sign bill release waivers, so that Cool Choices can get billing data from the utilities, and then that opens up the opportunity to take a look and see if there's any real difference. Well, they played a game in 2013 among the schools in Kaukauna and Menasha. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, where that is, it's right on either side of Appleton. And 220 players, students, their families, and teachers played these games, or this game. It lasted for 12 weeks, beginning in February of 2013. And because they were partnering, or this game had as its partners Kaukauna Utilities and Menasha Utilities, two muni providers, we were able to get not just player consumption data, but also some comparison data, which is really key for knowing whether the game caused the impact you see or not. So we ended up with 75 households worth of electricity consumption, representing 97 players that were part of this game. And we could take a look at how much electricity they used in the 12 months before the game and the 12 months after. And here are the results. They were fairly typical households, using about 11 to 12,000 kilowatt hours a year. And from the 1 year, the pre-game year, to the post-game year, they experienced a reduction of 248 on average kilowatt hours for the year, or a savings of 2%. Not all households saved exactly 2.1%. Here's a histogram showing the range. Some used more, some used less, but on average it was a 2.1% savings. And statistically speaking, given the number of households we have, it's not statistically significantly different from zero, but not far off, as you can see here. Be interesting to see what we would see if we had hundreds of households. What's key, though, is we don't know whether there were, or we don't know from this whether there are natural variations. Is there anything that outside the game that might have caused these decreases? And that's where having partnerships with the local munis was really key. We were able to get, for that same time period, the whole set of residential households, residential customers for both Kaukauna and Menasha, and look at their average energy consumption or electricity consumption. And you can see on this chart, the usage on average is a little lower because the populations include some one-person households, renters that aren't going to be as likely to be involved in the school system. But both Kaukauna and Menasha residential customers ended up using virtually the same amount of electricity before and after the game, which gives us some assurance that the game had an impact, and what we see here, the 250 or so kilowatt hours, can be attributed to the game. So this is the second billing analysis that we've done for Cool Choices. The first one was in a workplace setting as opposed to within schools. And in both cases, we were finding large uncertainties around our estimate. That's something that we need to grapple with, but in both cases, the direction is what we would hope to see, and we see a positive, seemingly positive impact from the game on household electricity consumption. That's all I've got. Any questions? Comments?